morning for the justice system to prevail, and I'm still waiting. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. Earlier this month, the Health Committee forwarded a report to the full legislature on the confirmation of Nathaniel Berg to be chairman of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, an appointment by Governor Luliang Guerrero. There was a discrepancy, whether this discrepancy was accidental or manufactured. I'll show you a couple of videos so you can argue about what the motives might have been. There was a discrepancy in the report that caused Senator Sabina Perez in the December 6th session to question the accuracy of the report and whether the confirmation of Dr. Berg should be in the voting file that day. And so what happened was the senators agreed with Senator Chris Barnett, who made a motion to reconsider his placement in the voting file so that the intention was, according to the senators I spoke to, was for the correction to be made to the committee report, and then they would place his name back onto the voting file. Later that day, on December 6th, another senator attempted to place Dr. Berg's name back onto the voting file after the correction. That motion failed. They weren't able to get Dr. Berg onto the voting file. And then on December 16, when the legislature went back into session, Senator Will Parkinson made another effort to place Dr. Berg onto the voting file so that the legislature can vote him up or down. That motion to place him onto the voting file failed. Now, there is a lot of information involving this controversy and involving Dr. Berg. And a lot of this, a lot of this has to do with two things. One, medical accountability, medical malpractice. And two, money. Now, I'll try to explain this as simply as possible because, I mean, if you've been watching Kandit, basically from the first year, in the very first year, one of the first topics we ever tackled, aside from the high cost of shipping in this island, the second, right after the high cost of shipping, we began to look into what this law that Guam has called the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act. And the reason that we began to look into it was because on October 31, 2018, a 5-year-old boy by the name of Asher Dean Lebowski succumbed to the sickness that he had, where he was being treated at Guam Memorial Hospital. Fast forward years later, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services did an audit of that case and of others and confirmed that there was negligence on the part of Guam Memorial Hospital staff. And when I say staff, I mean the medical staff that were involved in the case. It ended up that that case was settled with the child's father, David Lebowski. Since that time, Mr. Lebowski has been an avid, just an outspoken advocate for medical accountability and really a crusade against corruption in general in Guam. And it was because of that event, the death of Asher Dean Lebowski, the first interview that we had with David Lebowski, it was just heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching interview that we had with this man who just, and I can't even say understandably because I don't know how to be anything but sympathetic because I don't know what it's like to have a child, or much less to lose a child. This man lost his youngest child. And what he found when he was trying to seek justice for his son was that the way the law is set up in this island, it is virtually impossible for anyone who is not rich to even attempt to hold a medical professional accountable for alleged medical malpractice. There's a whole lot of explanation that goes into that. I don't want to explain. We've explained this many times in the past about this whole process and how things are unfair. Even Judge Francis Tidinko Gatewood, during a hearing, explained how the Medical Malpractice Act disenfranchises poor people and how the law the remedies of the law are not available to people who don't have the means to avail of the remedies available in the Medical Malpractice Mandatory Arbitration Act. And there has been a fight since that happened. Mr. Lebowski successfully got senators to introduce legislation. Some he did not agree with, one of which he fully agreed with. That was by Speaker Torres Terlahi. At the end of the day, none of the senators have been able to successfully push through MMMAA reform. It's a failure. Over the past 6 years, the legislature has failed to do something about it. And so part of his crusade wasn't just about making it so that people after him, God forbid, but it has happened, alleged medical malpractice leading to the deaths of other people, including children. There are other cases that have happened, and we have documented these cases in interviews that we've done with parents who are heartbroken about their children dying because of allegations of, or even evidence that they're able to produce of medical malpractice at Guam Memorial Hospital and allegedly at Guam Regional Medical City as well. And so part of his crusade, aside from the MMMAA, was also in holding the medical professionals accountable through the licensing and regulatory boards, the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, the Guam Board of Nursing, the Guam Allied Health Board. And what he's found over these years is something that, we've known to be true in the government. Anyone who's worked in the government of Guam knows this to be true, is that many of these regulatory boards are, for a lack of a better way of putting it, improperly staffed, or not staffed, improperly directed and led by people that have conflicts of interest. There's no real nice way of putting that. It's sort of like, how much faith do you have in Guam Police Department internal affairs? Because the premise is, and over the past several years, we've seen this to be true with almost no demand for accountability by the police department against their own who have done wrong through this IA process. You have cops investigating cops. Same sort of thing with the Board of Cosmetology or the Guam Medical Licensure Board or the Guam Nursing Board or the Guam Real Estate Board. You have professionals who are both business partners and competitors, making decisions using the power of government regulation, the awesome power of government regulation that has, notwithstanding due process built into the system, aside from that due process, this board has the stupendous and awesome power of stopping your livelihood, punishing you because they don't agree with you or because they're your competitor, or rewarding you improperly because you are a business associate. For the past 6 years, Mr. Lebowski has opined that Dr. Berg, as the chairman of the board, has rewarded his business associates, failed to punish his business associates who deserve to be punished, and has also allegedly retaliated against people who were his competitors. And in a write-up that he sent to Kandit, and that we published this morning, he basically lays out a political indictment against Dr. Berg. And he essentially, Mr. Lebowski's entire opinion is, do not confirm Dr. Berg to be the chairman of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners. I don't remember how long the term is, if it's 3 years or 4 years or 6 years. But the worst thing that can happen in Mr. Lebowski's eyes is for Dr. Berg to return to the board. Okay. So you're all caught up now with the Cliff's Notes of this thing on one side of the story. Okay. Now there is a second and arguably imminent side of the story. And that is that despite how some senators might feel about Dr. Berg, whether they like him or not, whether they agree with Mr. Lebowski about MMMA reform, about reform on the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, and how things are conducted on that board, and how, if you read Mr. Lebowski's opinion, he makes a very compelling case about the board and how it has, out of 65 cases filed by patients against physicians over the past several years, the board has never found in favor of a patient during this time. And so it's a staggering sort of statistic to look at, but there's this imminent side of this controversy, and that is that without a board chairman and without someone willing to step up to be the chairman of the Guam Board of Medical Examiners, physicians cannot be licensed. I'm not talking about the existing physicians. I'm talking about, and in this world where doctors on Guam are in advanced age, they want to retire, they want to leave, they want to go on vacation, they want to take a little break, they want to leave the island. They are leaving the island. Finding medical professionals is difficult, and so we are approaching an emergency situation. I would say a reasonable person would call the current situation urgent, because the board has been unable to provide temporary licenses because they don't have a chairman to provide licenses to physicians whom patients need. And so you have a group of senators who are trying to get Dr. Berg confirmed for no other reason than the board needs a chairman. And I get that. I understand. That is a reasonable thing to want, is for the continuation of the GBME's statutory business, which includes making sure that we have enough doctors. But I also get what Mr. Lebowski is saying. What about the board's statutory business to hold doctors accountable? And have they, over the past several years, failed in that responsibility for this, that, or the other reason? Now, that's the argument that's going on the surface level. That's the easy information to digest. And, if I'm being objective, and I am a proponent of MMMAA reform, I very much wanted Speaker Terlahi's bill to pass. I don't know why it was never brought up for a vote, so at the very least we could see which senators were for it or against it. I don't know what the politics are going on over there. But I think that there can be a compromise here. If we're being level-headed about this, and if we're being objective, taking into consideration the valid concerns that Mr. Lebowski has, and anyone who is concerned about medical malpractice and medical accountability, and taking into consideration the imminent nature of the GBME's responsibilities and duties, why not find a way to get Dr. Berg confirmed on a temporary basis? Could there not be some sort of legislative or administrative solution where his appointment will last for, let's say, a year rather than 3 years, rather than 6 years, or 6 months, or 3 months? Because what the board is saying in a statement that it released is that this was just sort of sprung on them. They didn't realize that the legislature was not going to confirm this guy. And so there's a vacuum in leadership, and the board needs a period of transition, some time for this adjustment, some time to, first of all, find someone who is versed in all the federal regulations that involve licensure of physicians, and someone who is willing to sign off on these things and to take the heat. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable. What if the governor submitted, or I don't know if the legislature can amend her appointment, but what if the governor submitted an appointment that said, I hereby appoint Dr. Berg for a 3-month term? And the legislature made the confirmation that way. And so that way, Mr. Lebowski and the people on that side of the fence don't get everything that they want. They really don't want Dr. Berg, at all, whatsoever. And I get that. I understand why he's saying that. And a lot of that has to do with Mr. Lebowski hasn't been heard he's been tossed around by the medical community. He's been, almost spit upon. They've dismissed his concerns, and his concerns are the concerns of many people on this island. He isn't the only victim of medical malpractice. And also, what about the rest of us? Because at some point in our lives, we're going to need Guam Memorial Hospital, Guam Regional Medical City, or Naval Hospital. And so, can't there be a compromise, right? Okay, and so that's all the surface level stuff. I think finding a solution there, it may not be the easiest thing in the world, but it's easier than looking at what's below the surface here. And I want to show you something. I want to show you 3 clips of the legislature. 2 of them were from December 6. One of them was from December 16, the 2 sessions where they discussed the possibility of confirming Dr. Berg. Here's the first clip, and it is of that Senator Barnett motion that I told you about to reconsider or to take him out of the voting file so that they could make that adjustment. But here's what was said. I want you to pay attention not to Senator Barnett, but to everybody else in the room. Stand by.
Madam Speaker, at this time I'd like to make a motion for the body to reconsider the motion to place Dr. Nathaniel Berg's nomination on the agenda.
Onto the voting file to reconsider that motion?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there any objection to reconsidering the motion? Seeing no objection, that motion carries.
Okay, so you didn't see anyone in any of the senators say anything about Dr. Berg, right? You didn't see anyone raise their hand. You didn't see anyone making any concerns, making any sort of revelation about anything. You just saw a Senator Barnett making a motion. You saw Speaker Terlahi asking whether anyone objects, and you saw nobody objecting. Then you saw Speaker Terlahi gaveling the motion as being passed. So that's the motion that took Dr. Berg off of the voting file on December 6th, right? Later that day, during the same session, the senators tried to put Dr. Berg's appointment back onto the voting file, and this is what happens. And pay attention again to what's happening in the room.
On the motion was to place the nomination of Dr. Nathaniel Berg, MD, to the voting file. Is there any objection? There's an objection. All in favor of moving the nomination to the voting file, please raise your hand. Motion fails.
Okay, in that clip, what you saw, you didn't see who was making the motion. That's not important. But the speaker asks, who is in favor of this motion to place Dr. Berg onto the voting file? And what you'll notice immediately is senators, there's a block of senators, okay? There's basically, there's not 2 cliques, but there's a clique that's always together, and then there's the rest of them, and sometimes they click, and it depends sort of what the issues are, right? But the clique that's always together in the 37th Guam legislature is Speaker Terlahi, Senator Barnett, Senator Sabina Perez, Senator Joanne Brown, and Senator Tello Taitigui. In this second video, what you will see is that the members of that clique, except for Barnett, because Barnett is resolute in this. He's not raising his hand. He is not voting to place Dr. Berg onto the voting file. But you see the rest of them, Joanne Brown, Tello Taitigui, and Sabina Perez, looking around the room. And what's interesting is that there was just enough votes so that Dr. Berg wouldn't be placed onto the voting file. You had Joanne Brown and Sabina Perez both voting to place Dr. Berg onto the voting file. Interesting, right? I thought they're a clique. What's going on there? And of course, the rest of them who are in the non-clique, they voted to place him on the voting file as well, but there weren't enough votes. Also, because some senators are absent. Senator San Augustine is off island because he's attending to a medical issue involving a close family member. I don't know why Senator Shelton's off island, but okay, I'll explain the dynamics in just a second. I just want to show you the third video. And this third video happened a couple of days ago. It was on December 16 when Senator Parkinson tried to get Dr. Berg onto the voting file again.
Notwithstanding House rules, I'd like to reconsider the actions of the body regarding Dr. Nathaniel Berg and put him onto the session agenda.
On that motion, are there any objections?
Madam Speaker?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, I have to recuse myself. He's my doctor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that motion, are there any objections? There is an objection. All those wishing to support the reconsideration to put Dr. Nathaniel Berg onto the session agenda, please signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion fails.
Did you notice who didn't vote this time around? First of all, let's notice Senator Tello Taitigui. So, 2 motions happened prior. Two on December 6th, and then there's this December 16 motion, right? The 2 motions on December 6th, Senator Tello Taitigui didn't say anything. Then all of a sudden on December 16, Senator Tello Taitigui says, I can't participate in this because I have to recuse myself because Dr. Berg is my doctor. Okay. All right. It's a little weird that she didn't say anything in the previous 2 votes, but okay. Then the vote happens, and Joanne Brown and Sabina Perez switched their votes. They no longer, something changed between December 6 and December 16, where they no longer support placing Dr. Berg onto the voting file. I'll tell you exactly what happened. This is not a matter of senators changing their minds because they got new information or because constituents called them up and they just had a change of heart about things. These senators, they count their votes. The reason that they look around the room is because they need to make sure that how their vote counts toward a couple of things. 1, whether it will pass or not, and 2, their ability to tell whoever is involved that they either voted or did not vote for that thing. And this is why it's so important for senators to be in the good graces of people like Dr. Berg, or not just Dr. Berg, but really anyone in the community who is to serve on some sort of board or commission or director who has money. There's a particular dynamic happening here. You can't just say, no, Dr. Berg, or no, Bank Pacific President Phil Flores, Vice Chairman of the GBME board. I am against your guy. I'm against you. You have to be able to say to these people who have influence, I tried. I did vote for that, but it didn't pass. These are games that these senators are playing. And this has nothing to do with how they feel about medical accountability, about medical malpractice, about the imminence and the urgency of licensing temporary physicians, even about the credibility of good people. For many senators, this is just a game. And it isn't just on this issue that they do stuff like this. They count votes all the time. One of the favorite things that senators that have last names that range from beginning with the first letter L through Z is their ability to sit back and see what all the other senators are, how all the other senators are going to vote. And that's why some senators pass twice before casting their vote, because they're waiting to see how the other senators vote. And if you have a last name that begins with a letter toward the end of the alphabet, you kind of are able to play the game a little bit better. In this case, in a hands vote, in a raise of hands vote, it's about looking around the room and raising your hand or not raising your hand before the presiding officer makes the count and makes the call. I fully believe that this entire thing was orchestrated to give to Dr. Berg and to Phil Flores the impression that some senators tried, but at the end of the day, having no desire whatsoever to get him confirmed. And then to be able to gaslight the public and say whatever it is. And, you know, I have to give Senator Barnett credit for at least being completely consistent throughout all of these votes. He's the only one on that side, on that clique, who was completely consistent with his votes. The speaker as well, I'm assuming. But boy, are these guys playing games. No matter what side of the fence you're on this, whether it's, you know, you support Dr. Berg, you think that he should be on the GPME as the chairman, or you support Mr. Lebowski's position, it really is a sad day. These are sad legislative days